The call light above bed 7 had been pulsing for 6 minutes. I stood at the nurse's station watching the amber glow reflect against the corridor wall. My hand rested on the medication cart. The metal felt cold. I had counted each pulse, 34 so far. Nadine stood beside me, reviewing discharge papers. She was the night supervisor, 20 years my senior. Her reading glasses sat low on her nose. She had not looked up once. The light pulsed again. 35. Constance Abernathy occupied bed 7, 81 years old, admitted 6 days earlier for pneumonia. Her chart showed stable vitals as of 10 o'clock rounds. It was now midnight. I shifted my weight. The rubber sole of my shoe caught slightly on the tile. Nadine turned a page. I had worked this geriatric floor for 3 years. 6 minutes was unusual. Most patients released the call button after 90 seconds. They either got help or they gave up. I opened my mouth, but Nadine spoke first. She told me to finish the medication inventory. Her tone was even matter of fact, the way she might remind me to initial a form. She kept her eyes on the paperwork. I looked back at the amber light. Constance had been quiet all week, polite, the kind of patient who apologized when you adjusted her pillow. Her daughter visited every afternoon with containers of homemade soup that Constance never touched. The visits lasted exactly 90 minutes. I reached for my pen. The call light went dark. Nadine glanced up briefly, then returned to her papers. She made a notation in red ink. The scratch of the ballpoint was the only sound in the hallway. I held the pen above the inventory sheet. My hand stayed frozen. Something was wrong. Not obviously wrong. Nothing I could name in a report. Just a detail that did not fit the pattern. Call lights did not extinguish themselves. Patients either received assistance or they manually released the button. It had to be deliberate, unless someone else had turned it off. I looked down the corridor. The night aide was on break. I had seen him enter the staff room 12 minutes ago with coffee and a paperback novel. Nadine stacked her papers and handed them to me. Her expression remained neutral. She told me the Abernathy woman was flagged. I took the papers. They were still warm from her hands. Flagged. I knew what that meant. Nadine explained that the family had filed 2 complaints this week regarding excessive pain medication. They suspected unnecessary sedation. Administration had opened a formal review. Until it closed, we were to minimize all non-essential contact with Constance Abernathy. Document only required care. Respond only to medical emergencies. I asked what constituted an emergency. Nadine looked at me directly. Her eyes were gray behind the lenses. She said I would recognize one when I saw one. A call light was not an emergency. She returned to her work. I placed my pen on the inventory sheet and began counting. 60 white tablets in bottle A, 45 blue capsules in bottle B. My hands moved through the familiar routine. The corridor remained quiet. At 12:14, I finished and signed the sheet. Nadine countersigned without reading it. She told me to check the East Wing patients. Mr. Kellerman in room 12 needed his blood pressure monitored before 12:30. I took the cuff from its hook. The East Wing was opposite from room 7. I walked slowly past rooms 9, 10, and 11. The floor had a checkerboard pattern of green and white tiles. Someone had mopped earlier. The sharp smell of disinfectant still hung in the air. At the wing junction, I stopped. From this angle, I could see the door to room 7. It was closed. A thin bar of yellow light showed underneath. The overhead fixture should have been off during evening protocol. That light was coming from somewhere else. The bathroom, perhaps. I glanced back toward the nurse's station. Nadine was filing papers. Her back faced me. I took 2 steps toward room 7 before I caught myself. The blood pressure cuff hung heavy in my hand. Mr. Kellerman was diabetic with unstable readings. If his pressure spiked without documentation, that would be actual negligence. I turned toward room 12. The room was dark, except for monitor glow. Mr. Kellerman slept on his side, breathing steadily. I wrapped the cuff around his arm without waking him. The Velcro made a soft tearing sound. He stirred but did not open his eyes. 142/93, elevated but manageable. I charted it and left quietly. The corridor was empty when I returned. At the junction, I looked again at room 7. The light beneath the door had gone dark. I stopped walking. Nadine called from the nurse's station. She asked if Mr. Kellerman's pressure was acceptable. I told her it was. She made a note in the log. She told me to take my break. Fresh coffee was available. I said I would do another walking round first. Nadine closed the logbook and stood. She removed her glasses and folded them carefully. She looked at me with an expression I could not interpret. Not anger. Something flatter. She reminded me the Abernathy situation was under active review. I said I understood. She said administration was monitoring this floor closely. One procedural error, and the entire night shift could face discipline. She had worked here 22 years without a formal complaint. She intended to maintain that record. I nodded. She told me again to take my break. I walked to the staff room. The night aide glanced up from his book and offered me cold coffee. I declined and sat by the window overlooking the parking lot. 3 cars under yellow lights. Mine was the blue sedan in the far corner. I stayed 11 minutes. When I returned, Nadine was gone. A note was clipped to the closed logbook. She had gone to check supply inventory. She would return in 20 minutes. I stood at the empty nurse's station and listened. The hospital at night had specific sounds. Machine hum, distant voices from other floors, occasional carts rolling past. But this corridor was silent. I looked at room 7. The door remained closed. I picked up a random chart and pretended to read. My eyes would not focus. I was listening for something undefined. At 12:41 I heard it, a sound so faint I nearly missed it. Not a call light, not a voice. Metal on metal, like a bed rail being adjusted. I set down the chart and walked toward room 7. My heartbeat accelerated. Not from fear, from the certainty that settles in your chest when you know you are about to cross a line that cannot be uncrossed. I reached the door and placed my hand on the handle. The metal was warm. I pushed the door open slowly. The room was darker than expected. No bathroom light. The only illumination came from behind me, a narrow wedge spilling across the linoleum before dissolving into shadow. Constance Abernathy lay on her back, head turned toward the window. The blanket was pulled to her chin. Her eyes were open. She did not acknowledge my entrance. I stepped inside and let the door close. The wedge of light disappeared. I stood in complete darkness, waiting for my vision to adjust. The room smelled different than during day shift. Not unpleasant, just altered. Like old paper mixed with something faintly metallic. The ventilation system hummed inside the wall. Shapes emerged gradually. The bedside table, the visitor chair, the IV stand without tubing. Constance's daughter had demanded its removal 3 days ago, said her mother did not need it. I approached the bed. Constance's eyes tracked my movement. She did not turn her head. Only her eyes followed me through the dimness. I asked if she needed something. My voice came out quieter than intended. I had not meant to whisper. She did not answer immediately. I waited. The silence extended. 5 seconds. 8, 12. Then she spoke. Her voice was thin but clear. She said she had pressed the call button because she needed the bathroom. I glanced toward the bathroom door. 3 steps from her bed. An easy distance for most patients. But Constance had not walked unassisted since her 3rd day here. Pneumonia had significantly weakened her. Yesterday's physical therapy notes documented reduced leg strength. I asked why she turned off the call light. She remained silent. I moved closer, near enough now to see her face more clearly. Her skin had that papery quality common in elderly patients, delicate, almost translucent. But her eyes were sharp, focused. She said she had not turned it off. I looked at the call button clipped to her bed rail. The cord hung loose. No tension, no sign of recent use. I asked if someone else had entered the room. She said no. I reached for the call button and tested it. The amber light activated immediately in the corridor. I released it. The light remained on 3 seconds, then extinguished, functioning properly. I looked back at Constance. She watched me with an expression I could not decode. Not confusion. Something more deliberate. She asked again about the bathroom. I told her I would help. I moved to the rail release. My fingers found the lever. I paused. Nadine's instruction echoed. Minimize all non-essential patient contact. I lowered the rail. The metal scraped against its housing. In the quiet room, the sound seemed amplified. I placed one hand under Constance's shoulder and helped her sit. She was lighter than anticipated. Her bones felt hollow beneath the hospital gown. Fragile as kindling, she swung her legs over the bedside with my assistance. Her feet touched the floor. Yellow non-slip socks with grey treads. I asked if she felt dizzy. She said no. I helped her stand. She swayed slightly, and I tightened my grip on her arm. Her skin was cool and dry under my palm. We moved toward the bathroom. 3 steps. On the second step, her right knee buckled momentarily. Not a collapse, just brief weakness. I steadied her, and we continued. At the bathroom door, I reached for the light switch. Constance's hand caught my wrist. The movement was faster than seemed possible for someone her age and condition. Her fingers wrapped around my wrist with surprising firmness. She said to leave the light off. I stopped. Her grip remained steady, not painful, just insistent. I asked why. She did not answer. She only looked at me. And in that moment, standing in the darkness of her hospital room, I saw something in her face that tightened my chest. Fear. Not the general anxiety most patients carried. Something specific, immediate. She released my wrist and entered the bathroom without illumination. The door closed with a soft click. I stood outside listening. Water running, movement sounds, normal bathroom activity. But nothing felt normal. I looked back at the bed, at the call button hanging from its cord, at the bedside table with its scattered items, tissues, a paperback with a cracked spine, a framed photograph facing away from me. I stepped to the table and turned the photograph. It showed Constance with 2 younger women. One was clearly her daughter. The other I did not recognize. They stood in a garden. Sunlight, flowers, all 3 smiling. The bathroom door opened. I turned. Constance braced herself against the doorframe. She looked more exhausted than 5 minutes ago. I helped her back to bed. The return trip took longer. Her steps were smaller, more cautious. When we reached the bedside, she sat heavily. I lifted her legs onto the mattress and adjusted the blanket. She settled against the pillow without speaking. I raised the rail. The mechanism locked with a metallic snap. I asked if she needed anything else. She stared at the ceiling. Her hands rested on the blanket, fingers interlaced. I noticed she was not wearing a wedding ring. Her daughter had probably removed it for safekeeping. She said she was fine. I told her to use the call button if she needed help during the night. No response. I moved toward the door. My hand touched the handle when she spoke again. She asked my name. I turned. She still faced the ceiling, not looking at me. I told her. Petra. She repeated it softly, testing how it sounded. Then she asked how long I had worked here. 3 years. She nodded slowly. She said that was good. Loyalty mattered. I did not know how to respond. She turned her head and looked directly at me. Her eyes were moist, not tears, just the natural moisture of age. But something else resided there, an intensity. She asked if I always did what I was told. The question landed strangely, too specific. I said I followed proper procedures. She smiled, small, sad. She said that was good too. Then she closed her eyes. I waited, watching her breathe. Her chest rose and fell steadily. After 30 seconds, I was certain she would not speak again. I left and closed the door behind me. The corridor remained empty. Nadine had not yet returned. I walked to the nurse's station and sat. My legs felt heavy, like I had been standing for hours. I looked at the logbook. Protocol required me to document the bathroom assistance. Time, patient condition, observations, standard documentation. I opened the logbook. Nadine's precise handwriting filled the upper portion. I picked up the pen. My hand hovered above the page. If I documented this, Nadine would see it. Administration would see it. Evidence of non-essential contact during an active review. But if I did not document it and something happened, that would be negligence, lying through omission. I set the pen down. Footsteps approached. Nadine's measured walk. I stood quickly and moved to the medication cart. When she rounded the corner, I was checking inventory. She nodded and sat. She opened the logbook and scanned the page. She looked up. She asked if everything had been quiet. I said yes. She made a notation and returned to her work. At 1:17, the phone rang. Nadine answered. She listened, then said she understood. She hung up. That was the night administrator. An incident on the surgical floor. 2 nurses called in sick. They needed coverage for 3 hours. She looked at me. She said I should go. The night aide could manage this floor. It was slow tonight. I asked about walking rounds. She said he would handle them. I took my notepad. Nadine was already writing. She did not look up as I left. The surgical floor was in another building. I crossed through the main atrium. The walk took 7 minutes. The charge nurse met me at the elevator. Her name was Gretchen. Competent. Direct. She handed me an assignment sheet. 4 post-operative patients, all stable. Monitoring and medication distribution at 2:30. I took the sheet and began rounds. The work was routine. Vitals, IV adjustments, pain assessments, charting. The 3 hours passed in mechanical repetition. At 4:20, I returned to the geriatric ward. The corridor was darker. Only every third light remained on. Energy conservation. The shadows between lights seemed deeper. I approached the nurse's station. The night aide sat in Nadine's chair with his book open. He said it had been quiet. No incidents. No call lights, except Mr. Kellerman requesting water at 2:45. I asked about room 7. He checked his notes. No activity. Walking rounds at 2 and 4. All patients sleeping. I thanked him, and he returned to the break room. I took his place at the desk. The logbook was still open. Nadine had made several entries during my absence. Standard notations. I looked toward room 7. The door was closed. No light beneath it. I stood and walked toward it without letting myself think why. At the door, I listened. Silence. I placed my hand on the handle. The metal was cool now. I opened the door slowly. Complete darkness. I had closed the door behind me, eliminating all light sources. I stood motionless, letting my eyes adjust. Shapes emerged. The bed, the chair, the window with closed blinds. Constance lay in the same position. Back flat, blanket to chin, eyes closed. I stepped closer. Her breathing was shallow but regular. 16 breaths per minute. Normal for her age. I was about to leave when I noticed. Her hands were no longer on top of the blanket. They were underneath, hidden, and the call button was not clipped to the bed rail. It was on the floor. I bent down and picked up the call button from the floor. The plastic casing was intact. No cracks, no damage. I examined it in the faint ambient light filtering through the window blinds. The cord was still attached to the bed rail mechanism. It had not been torn free. Someone had unclipped it deliberately. I looked at Constance. She had not moved. Her breathing remained steady. I clipped the call button back to the rail and placed it near her right hand, close enough to reach but not touching her. Then I stepped back and waited. She did not stir. I left the room and closed the door quietly behind me. The corridor stretched empty in both directions. The wall clock showed 4:38. Shift change was in 90 minutes. Nadine would return soon from wherever she had gone. I needed to decide what to document and what to leave unwritten. I walked back to the nurse's station and sat down. The logbook lay open. I stared at the blank lines beneath Nadine's last entry. My pen touched the paper. I wrote the time. 4:40 a.m. Then I stopped. The truth was simple. I had entered room 7, found the call button on the floor, returned it to its proper position. Patient remained asleep. No distress observed. But the truth was also incomplete. Why had the call button been on the floor? Had Constance knocked it off accidentally while sleeping? That seemed unlikely given its position on the far side of the rail. Had she thrown it deliberately? If so, why? And why were her hands hidden under the blanket when they had been resting on top of it earlier? I set down the pen without finishing the entry. Footsteps approached from the west corridor. not Nadine's measured pace. These steps were heavier, faster. Dwyer rounded the corner. His face looked pale under the fluorescent lighting. He was not carrying his book or thermos. He said I needed to come look at something. I stood. I asked what was wrong. He hesitated. Then he said, "Room 9. Mr. Branford." Something was off about his breathing. I followed him quickly down the corridor. Room 9 was 3 doors past Room 7. The door stood half open. Light spilled into the hallway. Inside, Mr. Branford lay propped at a 45-degree angle. His mouth was open. His breathing came in short, rapid pulls. His skin had taken on a grayish tint. I moved to his bedside and checked his pulse. Fast, thready. I looked at the monitor. Oxygen saturation at 87%. Blood pressure 160/105. I asked Dwyer when he had last checked on Mr. Branford. He said during his 4 a.m. rounds. 38 minutes ago. The patient had been sleeping normally then. I reached for the oxygen mask hanging on the wall mount and fitted it over Mr. Branford's face. I turned the flow to 4 liters. His chest continued its rapid rise and fall. I told Dwyer to page the on-call physician immediately. He left the room at a near run. I stayed with Mr. Branford, monitoring his vitals. His eyes opened briefly, unfocused, confused. He tried to speak, but the oxygen mask muffled his words. I told him to stay calm. Help was coming. His right hand reached up toward the mask. I gently guided it back down. His skin felt hot. Fever. I checked the chart clipped to the foot of his bed. He had been admitted for observation, following a mild stroke 3 days earlier. Aspirin therapy, blood pressure medication. No respiratory issues noted. Until now, the oxygen saturation climbed slowly. 89%, 91%. His breathing remained rapid, but the grayish tint began to fade slightly. Dwyer returned. He said the physician was on the way. Estimated arrival in 12 minutes. I nodded and continued monitoring. Mr. Branford's breathing gradually slowed. Not to normal, but less panicked. The oxygen was helping. I glanced at the doorway. From this angle, I could see part of the corridor. Room 7's closed door was visible in my peripheral vision. Dwyer stood beside me, asking if there was anything else he should do. I told him to prepare the crash cart, just in case. He left again. I watched the monitor. Oxygen saturation holding at 93%. Blood pressure beginning to decline. 152/98. Mr. Branford's eyes closed. His hand relaxed against the blanket. 8 minutes passed before the physician arrived. Dr. Reeves. I had worked with him before. Thorough, calm under pressure. He examined Mr. Branford quickly, checking lung sounds and reviewing the monitor readings. He asked me to describe what I had observed. I told him. Rapid breathing, low oxygen saturation, elevated blood pressure, gray skin tone. All symptoms had begun to resolve with supplemental oxygen. He nodded and made notes on the chart. He said it looked like acute pulmonary edema, possibly related to the stroke medications. He would need to adjust the dosage and add a diuretic. He wanted Mr. Branford transferred to the ICU for closer monitoring. He wrote orders and handed them to me. I said I would arrange the transfer. He thanked me and left to call the ICU directly. Dwyer and I prepared Mr. Branford for transport. We gathered his belongings and documentation. Within 20 minutes, the ICU team arrived with a gurney. They transferred him carefully and wheeled him away. The room fell silent. I looked at the wall clock. 5:36 a.m. Dwyer said he would clean and reset the room for the next admission. I told him I would update the logbook. We walked back to the nurses' station together. The corridor seemed brighter now. Dawn was beginning to filter through the windows at the far end of the building. Nadine stood at the desk. She had returned while we were handling the emergency. Her coat was draped over her chair. She looked at me with a neutral expression. She asked what had happened. I explained. Mr. Branford, respiratory distress. Physician called. Patient transferred to ICU. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she nodded once. She said that was good work. Quick response. Proper protocol. I waited for more, but she simply turned back to her paperwork. I sat and opened the logbook. I documented the entire incident with Mr. Branford. Time of discovery, symptoms observed, interventions performed, physician arrival, transfer completion. My handwriting looked shaky compared to Nadine's precise script. When I finished, I glanced back at the earlier blank entry, the one I had started at 4:40, the one about room 7. Nadine was reading something on her tablet, not watching me. I picked up the pen again. I could still document finding the call button on the floor. It was factual, relevant, part of proper patient monitoring, but now, after the emergency with Mr. Branford, it seemed less urgent, less significant. A call button knocked to the floor by an elderly patient shifting in her sleep. It happened. It did not warrant the same attention as acute pulmonary edema. I closed the logbook without adding the entry. Nadine looked up. She asked if I had completed the documentation. I said yes. She nodded and returned to her tablet. The wall clock showed 5:53. Shift change in 37 minutes. The day shift would arrive soon. Fresh nurses with full energy. They would take over the floor, and we would go home. I looked down the corridor one more time. Room 7's door remained closed. No light underneath, no sound, just stillness. Dwyer emerged from room 9, carrying cleaning supplies. He said the room was ready for the next patient. I thanked him. He asked if I wanted coffee before shift change. I declined. He shrugged and headed to the break room. I sat alone at the nurses' station. The building was beginning to wake. Distant sounds of activity on other floors. The kitchen staff starting breakfast preparation. The early morning custodial crew beginning their rounds. At 6:12, the first day shift nurse arrived. Her name was Monica. Young, enthusiastic. She greeted me with a bright smile and asked how the night had been. I told her about Mr. Branford. She listened carefully and made notes. She asked if there was anything else significant. I paused. Then I said no. Everything else had been routine. She nodded and began reviewing the patient charts. At 6:28, Nadine stood and gathered her coat. She told me good work tonight. She said she would see me tomorrow evening. I said good night. She left through the main corridor. At 6:30, exactly the day, shift supervisor arrived and officially took over. I gave report to Monica, reviewing each patient's status and overnight activities. When I reached Constance Abernathy, I kept it brief. Stable condition, no incidents. Call light, used once for bathroom assistance. Monica noted it and moved to the next patient. I gathered my belongings and walked toward the exit. The sun was rising beyond the atrium windows. Clear sky, no clouds. I pushed through the doors into the parking lot. The cold air hit my face. February morning, sharp and clean. I walked to my car and sat in the driver's seat without starting the engine. I thought about Constance's question. Do you always do what you are told? I started the car and drove home. I slept for 4 hours and woke to my phone ringing. The screen showed the hospital's main number. I answered. It was Gretchen from the surgical floor. She said she was calling on behalf of administration. They needed me to come in early tonight, 5 p.m. instead of 7. Staffing issue on the geriatric ward. I asked what kind of issue. She said Nadine had called in sick. The evening supervisor was covering until I arrived, but she had commitments at 5. They needed overlap. I told her I would be there. She thanked me and hung up. I lay in bed, looking at the ceiling. Nadine had never called in sick during my 3 years on the floor. Not once. She took pride in perfect attendance. I got up and made coffee. At 4:30, I drove back to the hospital. The parking lot was fuller than usual for this time. Visitor hours. The main entrance had a steady flow of people coming and going. I took the staff entrance and went directly to the geriatric ward. The evening supervisor was a woman named Lillian, older than Nadine. She had worked at the hospital for 30 years, mostly in administration. She rarely worked floor duty anymore. She looked relieved when I arrived. She said it had been quiet so far. All patients stable. No incidents. She handed me the day shift report and the updated charts. I asked if there was any word on when Nadine would return. Lillian said she did not know. Nadine had called at noon, said she was unwell, did not specify what was wrong or when she expected to be back. I thanked her. Lillian gathered her things and left quickly. I reviewed the charts at the nurse's station. Mr. Branford's bed remained empty. Still in ICU, the other patients showed routine status updates, medications administered, meals consumed, vital signs within normal ranges. I reached Constance Abernathy's chart. The day shift notes showed she had refused breakfast and lunch. When asked why, she said she was not hungry. No other complaints. No call light usage. Her daughter had visited from 2 to 3:30. The nurse noted the daughter had seemed agitated but did not elaborate. I set down the chart and looked toward room 7. The door was closed. I stood and walked down the corridor. The evening shift was just beginning. The floor was quiet. Most patients were in their rooms. Dinner trays would not arrive for another hour. I stopped outside room 7 and listened. No sound. I knocked softly. No response. I opened the door. Constance sat in the visitor's chair beside the window, not in bed. She wore a robe over her hospital gown. Her feet were bare. She stared out the window at the parking lot below. She did not turn when I entered. I asked if she was all right. She continued looking out the window. After a long pause, she said she was fine. I asked why she had refused her meals. She said she was not hungry. I moved closer. From this angle, I could see her face in profile. Her skin looked paler than yesterday, more drawn. The sharp angles of her cheekbones were more pronounced. I asked if she was in pain. She said no. I asked if I could help her back to bed. She turned her head and looked at me directly. Her eyes held that same intensity from the night before. But something else had been added, something harder. She asked if Nadine was working tonight. The question surprised me. I asked how she knew Nadine's name. She smiled slightly. She said she had heard us talking in the corridor. Last night, through the door, I told her Nadine had called in sick. Constance nodded slowly. She said that was interesting. I asked why. She did not answer. She turned back to the window. I waited. After nearly a minute, she spoke again. She asked if I had documented helping her to the bathroom last night. My chest tightened. I asked why she wanted to know. She said she was curious. She said people make choices every day about what to record and what to forget. She wanted to know which choice I had made. I told her I had documented it. She looked at me again. She said nothing, just looked. And I realized immediately that she knew I was lying. I do not know how she knew, but she did. She said it was all right. She understood. Rules were complicated, especially when they conflicted with each other. I asked what she meant. She said there were rules about patient care and rules about self-preservation. Sometimes those rules pointed in opposite directions. She said she had spent her whole life following rules. She understood the cost. I did not know how to respond. She stood slowly from the chair. Her legs were unsteady. I moved to help her, but she raised one hand. She said she could manage. She walked to the bed on her own. 3 steps, slow but deliberate. She sat on the edge of the mattress and swung her legs up. I helped adjust the blanket despite her earlier refusal of assistance. She settled against the pillow and closed her eyes. I asked if she needed anything. She said no. I turned to leave. Her voice stopped me at the door. She said my name, Petra. I turned back. Her eyes were still closed. She said she wanted to tell me something important. I waited. She said her husband had been a medic in Korea. He had told her once about a night when 3 wounded soldiers were brought to him at the same time. He only had supplies to save 2. He chose based on rank, saved the lieutenant and the sergeant, let the private die. She opened her eyes and looked at the ceiling. She said her husband lived with that choice for 43 years, until the day he died. He never spoke about it except that one time, but she knew it haunted him. The mathematics of it, the cold logic, following the rules meant someone died who did not have to die. I stood frozen at the door. She said she was not criticizing him, or criticizing me. She was just stating a fact. Sometimes obedience costs more than disobedience, but you do not know which until it is too late. I asked why she was telling me this. She turned her head and looked at me one final time. She said because tomorrow, her daughter was moving her to a different facility, a nursing home 60 miles away. She would leave in the morning, and she wanted me to understand that what happened here mattered, even if no one ever knew. Even if it was never documented. My throat felt tight. I asked if she wanted to go to the nursing home. She smiled. That same sad smile from before. She said it did not matter what she wanted. Then she closed her eyes again and said she was tired. I left the room and closed the door. I stood in the corridor, unable to move. My hands were shaking. I pressed them against my sides until they stopped. When I returned to the nurse's station, I sat and stared at the logbook. The blank entry from last night was still there, unwritten. I picked up the pen. I could write it now. Document the call button incident. Document the bathroom assistance. Document tonight's conversation. All of it factual. All of it true. But documentation now would raise questions. Why the delay? Why wait 20 hours to report routine patient care? It would look suspicious. It would invite scrutiny. And scrutiny would fall on Nadine. On me. On the entire night shift. I set down the pen. At 7:15, the night aide arrived. A different aide than last night. His name was Roland. He was older, methodical. He asked for the patient rundown. I gave him the list. He listened carefully and made notes. When I finished, he asked if there were any special instructions. I hesitated. Then I said room 7, Constance Abernathy. She refused meals today. Monitor her closely. If she requests anything, respond immediately. Roland nodded and wrote it down. At 8 o'clock, I did walking rounds. I checked each patient systematically. Most were settling in for the evening. Medication distribution would begin in 30 minutes. I saved room 7 for last. I knocked. No response. I opened the door. Constance was asleep. Her breathing was quiet and regular. The call button was clipped to the rail where I had left it that morning. I watched her for a moment. In sleep, she looked smaller. Fragile. Like she might disappear entirely if you looked away too long. I backed out and closed the door quietly. At 9 o'clock, Nadine's replacement supervisor arrived. Her name was Margaret. She was temporary staff, covering multiple shifts across different wards. She looked harried and overwhelmed. She asked if I needed anything before she started her rounds on the adjacent floor. I said no. Everything was under control. She thanked me and left. I was alone at the nurse's station. The hospital moved around me with its usual nighttime rhythm, but something felt different, off balance, like a machine missing a critical part. At 9:45, Constance's call light came on. I stood immediately and walked to room 7. I knocked and entered. Constance was sitting up in bed. Her face was flushed. Her breathing was shallow and fast. I moved to her bedside. I asked what was wrong. She said she could not breathe properly. Her chest felt tight. I checked her pulse. Rapid. I looked at her oxygen saturation on the finger monitor. 88%. I reached for the oxygen mask. She grabbed my wrist. The same firm grip as before. She said no oxygen. No intervention. She just wanted me to sit with her. I told her she needed supplemental oxygen. Her saturation was too low. She tightened her grip. She said she did not want it. She wanted to talk to me instead. I looked at her face. The fear was back, but underneath it was something else. Determination. I asked what she wanted to talk about. She released my wrist. She said she wanted to tell me the truth. I pulled the visitor's chair close to the bed and sat down. Constance's breathing remained shallow. I watched the monitor. Her oxygen saturation held at 88%. Low, but not critical. Not yet. I told her I was listening. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she began speaking. Her voice was quiet, but steady. She said her daughter had been giving her pills that were not prescribed. Small white tablets hidden inside the homemade soup containers. 3 times a week for the past 6 months. I asked what kind of pills. She said she did not know exactly, but they made her tired, confused, weak. After taking them, she would sleep for hours and wake feeling disconnected from her body. I asked why her daughter would do that. Constance's eyes remained fixed on mine. She said because confused elderly patients get moved to memory care facilities, and memory care facilities are expensive, and her daughter has power of attorney over her finances. My chest felt hollow. She continued. She said 6 months ago she had been healthy, active. She volunteered at the library twice a week. She drove herself to appointments. She lived independently in her own home. Then the pills started. Her daughter said they were vitamins, supplements for bone health. Constance trusted her. She took them. Within 2 months she was falling regularly, forgetting conversations, missing appointments. Her daughter suggested it might be early dementia, suggested she move in temporarily for observation. Constance refused. 2 weeks later she developed pneumonia, real pneumonia, bad enough to require hospitalization. Her daughter brought her here, and once she was admitted, the complaints started. Too much pain medication, over-sedation, unnecessary interventions. I understood immediately. The complaints created a paper trail, evidence of declining mental state, confusion, inability to advocate for herself. I asked if she had told anyone. She said she tried. She told a day shift nurse 3 days ago. The nurse smiled and patted her hand, told her not to worry, said confusion was common with pneumonia, promised to mention it to the doctor. Nothing happened. She tried to tell the doctor during rounds. Her daughter was in the room. Every time Constance started to speak, her daughter interrupted, corrected her, explained gently that her mother was getting confused, having memory issues. The doctor looked at her daughter, not at Constance. I felt my hands grip the armrests. Constance said last night when I helped her to the bathroom, she had wanted to tell me then. But she was afraid. She did not know if I would believe her. She did not know if I would help, or if I would think she was confused like everyone else. So she tested me instead. She asked if I always did what I was told. She wanted to see how I would answer. I asked what happened to the call button. She said she threw it on the floor herself. After I left, she wanted to see if I would document it, if I would notice, if I cared enough to wonder why, when I did not document it. She knew. I asked what she knew. She said she knew I was afraid, just like she was afraid. Both of us trying to survive in a system that punished honesty more than it rewarded it. The monitor beeped. Her oxygen saturation had dropped to 86%. I stood and reached for the oxygen mask again. She said, please, no oxygen yet. She needed me to hear the rest. I sat back down. My leg bounced involuntarily. I pressed my hand against my knee to stop it. She said this morning her daughter came during visiting hours, brought the soup as always. But this time Constance refused to eat it, said she was not hungry. Her daughter insisted. Became agitated when Constance continued refusing. The day shift nurse noticed the tension, asked if everything was all right. Her daughter smiled and said her mother was being difficult lately, not eating, not cooperating with care. She was worried. She thought maybe it was time to consider long-term memory care. The nurse suggested a nursing home consultation might be helpful. Her daughter agreed immediately, made calls right there in the room, found a facility with an opening, arranged transport for tomorrow morning. Constance said by tomorrow afternoon she would be 60 miles away in a locked memory care unit, and her daughter would have full access to her home, her savings, her life. The monitor beeped again. 84%. I asked why she was refusing oxygen now. She looked at me with complete clarity. She said because if I called the doctor for respiratory distress, they would sedate her. They would assume it was pneumonia complications. They would document it as further evidence of decline. And tomorrow she would be transferred anyway. But now with additional medical justification, she said the only way to prove she was not confused was to stay conscious, to stay clear, to tell someone who might actually listen. She said that someone was me. The oxygen saturation hit 82%. I told her she was risking serious harm, brain damage, cardiac arrest. She said she knew. But being shipped to memory care while fully aware was also serious harm, just slower. I stood and paced to the window. My reflection stared back at me in the dark glass. Behind me, I could see Constance in the bed, waiting. I had two choices. I could call the doctor. Document respiratory distress. Follow proper medical protocol. Constance would receive treatment. She would survive the night. And tomorrow she would be transferred to the nursing home as planned. Her daughter would have what she wanted. Constance's accusations would be dismissed as confusion, paranoia, delusions. Or I could believe her, but believing her meant acting. And acting meant breaking every rule I had been told to follow. It meant documenting a patient's allegations of abuse. It meant triggering an investigation. It meant going against family wishes, against administration's directive to minimize contact, against Nadine's explicit orders. It meant choosing Constance over my job, over my safety, over the careful obedience that had kept me employed and invisible for 3 years. The monitor alarm sounded. Oxygen saturation at 80%. I turned from the window. I looked at Constance. Her skin had taken on that grayish tint. Her lips showed a faint blue tinge, but her eyes remained focused, alert. She asked me what I was going to do. I walked to the bedside. I picked up the oxygen mask. She tensed. I placed it over her face and turned the flow to 6 liters. She tried to push it away, but I held it gently in place. I told her to breathe. She looked at me with something close to betrayal. I said I believed her, every word, and I was going to help her. But I could not help her if she died of hypoxia in the next 10 minutes. Her hand slowly dropped away from the mask. I watched the monitor. The oxygen saturation began climbing. 82, 85, 88. When it reached 92, I stepped back. I told her I was going to document everything she told me. I was going to call social services. I was going to request a psychiatric evaluation. Not to prove she was confused, to prove she was not. I told her it was going to be ugly. Her daughter would fight back. There would be lawyers, investigations. Her transfer tomorrow would be delayed, but she would likely remain hospitalized during the investigation. I told her I would probably be disciplined, possibly fired. Nadine had made the rules clear. I had ignored them. But I told her none of that mattered, because the cost of staying silent was higher than the cost of speaking. She reached up and moved the oxygen mask aside, just enough to speak. Her voice was muffled but clear. She said, "Thank you." I adjusted the mask back into place and told her not to talk. Just breathe. I left the room and walked to the nurse's station. My hands were steady now. My mind was clear. I sat down and opened the logbook. I picked up the pen. I began writing. I documented everything. The call button on the floor, the bathroom assistants I had not reported, tonight's conversation, Constance's allegations, her symptoms, her clarity of mind, her refusal of oxygen and the reason why. I wrote for 11 minutes without stopping. When I finished, I picked up the phone and called the social services emergency line. A woman answered on the 3rd ring. I identified myself and my location. I said I needed to report suspected elder abuse. The woman asked me to describe the situation. I did. The woman listened. She asked questions. I answered each one directly. She said she would dispatch an investigator immediately. They would arrive within 2 hours. She asked me to ensure the patient remained safe until then. I said I would. She told me I had done the right thing. I hung up. The corridor was silent. The hospital continued its nighttime routine around me, unaware that anything had changed. But everything had changed. I had chosen, and there was no going back. The social services investigator arrived at 11:43. Her name was Bryn Caldwell. She wore a grey suit and carried a leather briefcase. She looked tired but alert. She shook my hand firmly and asked to see the patient. I led her to room 7. Constance was awake. The oxygen mask still covered her face. Her saturation had stabilized at 94%. She watched us enter with careful eyes. Bryn introduced herself. She explained she was there to investigate the allegations I had reported. She asked if Constance was willing to speak with her. Constance nodded. Bryn pulled the visitor's chair close to the bed. She opened her briefcase and removed a tablet and a recording device. She asked permission to record the conversation. Constance nodded again. I moved toward the door to give them privacy. Bryn asked me to stay. She said I was a material witness. My presence was necessary. I stood near the window while Bryn conducted the interview. She asked Constance to describe what had been happening. Constance moved the oxygen mask aside and spoke slowly. She recounted the same information she had told me. The pills hidden in the soup, the gradual weakening, the manipulation, the planned transfer. Bryn listened without interrupting. She took notes on her tablet. When Constance finished, Bryn asked specific questions. How long had this been happening? Did Constance have any of the pills in her possession? Had she told anyone else besides the day shift nurse and me? Constance answered each question. No pills remained. Her daughter always removed the empty soup containers. She had told 2 nurses total. Neither had believed her. Bryn asked about Constance's medical history. Any previous diagnosis of dementia or cognitive decline? Constance said no. She had been evaluated 6 months ago during her annual checkup. No issues noted. Bryn made more notes. Then she asked about Constance's daughter, her name, her address, her relationship with Constance prior to 6 months ago. Constance provided the information. She said their relationship had always been distant but cordial. Her daughter had never shown particular interest in her mother's finances until recently. Bryn asked what had changed recently. Constance hesitated. Then she said her daughter had gotten divorced 8 months ago. The settlement had not been favorable. She had lost the house. She was living in a rental with significant debt. Bryn nodded slowly. She asked a few more questions about the power of attorney arrangement. When it had been signed. Under what circumstances? Constance said she had signed it 3 years ago. Standard planning. She had been healthy then. It was supposed to be used only in case of actual incapacity. Bryn closed her tablet. She said she had enough to open a formal investigation. She would need to interview the daughter, review medical records, potentially test Constance for the presence of any substances in her system. She said the planned transfer tomorrow would be suspended pending the investigation outcome. Constance's shoulders dropped slightly. Relief. Bryn stood and told Constance she would return tomorrow morning with additional questions. She asked me to step into the corridor. I followed her out. She closed the door behind us. She asked me to walk her through my observations chronologically. I did. I told her about the call light, the bathroom assistants, the conversation tonight, the physical symptoms, everything I had documented in the logbook. She listened carefully. When I finished, she asked why I had not documented the initial bathroom assistance. I told her the truth. I had been ordered to minimize contact with Constance. There was an ongoing family complaint. I was afraid of repercussions. Bryn's expression did not change. She asked who had given that order. I said Nadine. The night supervisor. Bryn wrote down the name. She asked where Nadine was tonight. I said she had called in sick. Bryn looked at me directly. She asked when exactly Nadine had called in sick. I said this afternoon. Around noon, according to the evening supervisor. Bryn asked if Nadine had ever called in sick before, during my time working here. I said no. Never. Bryn was quiet for a moment. Then she asked if I knew how to reach Nadine. I said I had her phone number in the staff directory. Bryn asked me to try calling her now. We walked back to the nurse's station. I pulled up the directory on the computer and dialed Nadine's number. It rang 6 times, then went to voicemail. A generic automated message. I hung up and told Bryn. Bryn asked if that was unusual. I said yes. Nadine always answered her phone. She was meticulous about communication. Bryn made another note. She asked for Nadine's home address. I hesitated. Bryn said it was part of the investigation. Staff behavior during the period in question was relevant. I gave her the address from the directory. Bryn thanked me. She said she would follow up. She asked me to continue monitoring Constance and to call her immediately if the daughter attempted to visit before morning. I said I would. Bryn left through the main corridor. I sat at the nurse's station and stared at the logbook. My documentation was there in blue ink, permanent, undeniable. Roland appeared from the east wing. He asked if everything was all right. He had seen the investigator. I told him there was a situation. An investigation. He did not need to worry about it. He nodded, uncertainly, and returned to his rounds. At 12:30, my phone vibrated. A text message from an unknown number. It said, "This is Bryn Caldwell. I visited Nadine's residence. She was not there. Her neighbor said she left early this morning with luggage. Did not say where she was going. Please call me immediately if you hear from her." I stared at the message. Nadine had left, with luggage. The same day I reported the abuse allegations, I thought back to the past few weeks. Had there been signs? Had Nadine seemed different, anxious, distracted? I could not remember anything obvious. She had been her usual self, precise, controlled, demanding adherence to protocol. Then I remembered something. 3 weeks ago, late on a Thursday night, I had returned from the break room and found Nadine standing outside room 7, just standing there, looking at the closed door. I had asked if something was wrong. She had startled slightly, said no. She was just checking on a patient, but she had not gone inside. She had just stood there, watching the door. At the time, I had thought nothing of it. Supervisors checked on patients. It was normal, but now the memory felt different, heavy with meaning I had missed. I texted Bryn back. I told her about that night 3 weeks ago. She responded immediately. What date exactly? I checked my phone calendar. I told her. She said, that was the same night Constance's daughter filed her first formal complaint. My stomach dropped. Bryn's next message came quickly. I need you to check something. Review the medication logs for Constance Abernathy going back 6 weeks. Look for any irregularities, anything that does not match standard protocol. Can you do that? I said yes. I pulled Constance's complete file from the digital records. I opened the medication log and began scrolling backward. The entries were detailed. Every medication, every dosage, every time, every nurse who administered it. I went back 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Then I saw it. 4 weeks ago. A notation for administration of lorazepam, a sedative, ordered by Dr. Reeves for anxiety, but there was no corresponding order in the physician's notes. No documentation of why it had been prescribed. No record of Constance requesting it. I scrolled further. 5 weeks ago. Another lorazepam entry. Same situation. No physician's order. 6 weeks ago. The same. All 3 entries had been signed by the same nurse. Nadine. My hands started shaking. I texted Bryn. Found unauthorized sedative administration. 3 instances. 6 weeks ago through 4 weeks ago. All signed by the night supervisor. Bryn called me immediately. She asked me to describe exactly what I found. I did. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said this changed everything. She explained. Constance's daughter had not been acting alone. She had help. Someone with medical access. Someone who could administer medications without raising suspicion. Someone who could create a documented pattern of confusion and sedation that would support a memory care transfer. Nadine. Bryn asked if I knew the nature of Nadine's relationship with Constance's daughter. I said I did not. Bryn said she would find out. She asked me to secure the medication logs, make copies, do not let anyone modify or delete them. I said I would. She said she was contacting the police. This was no longer just elder abuse. It was conspiracy, fraud, potentially assault. She hung up. I sat in the empty nurse's station with my phone in my hand. Nadine had been involved from the beginning. She had been drugging Constance, creating the paper trail, and when I had been ordered to minimize contact with Constance, it was not to protect the hospital from complaints. It was to keep me away, to keep anyone from noticing what was happening, and I had obeyed. For 6 weeks I had followed Nadine's orders without question. I had trusted her experience, her authority, her 22 years of perfect attendance. I had trusted the wrong person, and Constance had suffered because of it. If I had questioned Nadine's orders earlier, if I had documented the bathroom assistants the first night, if I had insisted on investigating why Constance seemed afraid, how much could have been prevented? The answer settled in my chest like a stone. All of it. I stood and walked to room 7. I opened the door quietly. Constance was sleeping. The oxygen mask had been adjusted to a lower flow. Her breathing was steady, peaceful. I watched her for a long moment. Then I returned to the nurse's station and waited for the police to arrive. They came at 2:15 a.m. 2 detectives. They interviewed me for 40 minutes. I told them everything. They took copies of the medication logs. They took my written statement. When they finished, the lead detective told me I had done the right thing by reporting, but his words felt hollow. Because I had not done the right thing. I had done the right thing eventually. After 6 weeks of doing nothing, the detective left. The corridor returned to silence. At 3 a.m. I checked on Constance again. Still sleeping. I sat with her until shift change. When dawn came through the window, I finally understood. Obedience had not protected me. It had made me complicit, and recognition had come too late to erase that truth. The day shift arrived at 6:30. Monica took report from me. I walked her through each patient. When I reached Constance Abernathy, I kept my voice level. I told her about the investigation, the social services visit, the police interviews, the medication log discrepancies. Monica listened without interrupting. Her usual bright smile was gone. When I finished, she asked if I was all right. I said I was fine. She did not look convinced, but she did not press. I gathered my belongings and left. The parking lot was filling with morning staff. I walked to my car and sat inside without starting the engine. The sun was fully up now. Clear February light cutting across the windshield. My phone rang. Administration. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again. Same number. I answered. The voice identified herself as Patricia Holden from Human Resources. She asked if I could come to her office before leaving the premises. I said I would be there in 5 minutes. Her office was on the 2nd floor. Small, windowless. She sat behind a metal desk with a thin file folder in front of her. She asked me to sit. I did. She opened the folder. She said there had been significant developments overnight. An elder abuse investigation, police involvement, allegations against a senior staff member. She said my name appeared throughout the investigative reports. I waited. She asked me to describe my involvement from the beginning. I did. I told her about the orders to minimize contact, about finding the call button, about Constance's allegations, about my decision to report. She listened. She made notes. When I finished, she closed the folder. She said the hospital took elder abuse very seriously. They were cooperating fully with law enforcement. She said Nadine had been placed on immediate administrative leave, pending the investigation outcome. She said my employment status was under review. I asked what that meant. She said I had violated direct supervisory orders. I had failed to document required patient interactions. I had delayed reporting critical information for nearly 24 hours. She said those were serious procedural violations. But she also said I had ultimately made the correct ethical choice. I had protected a vulnerable patient. I had exposed potential criminal activity. The hospital needed to balance those factors. She said I was being placed on paid administrative leave for 2 weeks while they completed their internal review. I should not return to the hospital during that time. I would be contacted with their decision. I asked if I was being fired. She said she could not answer that yet. I stood and left. I drove home through morning traffic. The radio played, but I did not hear it. At home I slept poorly. I woke every few hours expecting my phone to ring. It did not ring. 3 days passed. Then a week. On the 8th day, Bryn Caldwell called. She asked if I could meet her at a coffee shop near the hospital. I said yes. She was already there when I arrived. 2 cups of coffee on the table. She gestured for me to sit. She said she wanted to update me. The investigation had progressed quickly. Nadine had been located in another state. She had been arrested. She was cooperating with investigators in exchange for a reduced charge recommendation. She had confirmed everything. The arrangement with Constance's daughter, the unauthorized sedatives, the falsified medication records, the systematic isolation of Constance to prevent discovery. Constance's daughter had also been arrested. Fraud, elder abuse, conspiracy. Bryn said Constance was still hospitalized, but her condition had improved significantly. Once the sedatives cleared her system, her confusion had disappeared. Her strength was returning. She would not be transferred to memory care. She would return to her own home with monitoring services in place. I asked if Constance knew I was on leave. Bryn said yes. Constance had asked about me several times. Bryn slid a folded piece of paper across the table. She said Constance had written something for me. She had asked Bryn to deliver it. I opened the paper. The handwriting was shaky but clear. It said, "Thank you for seeing me when everyone else looked away. What you lost by helping me matters. Do not let anyone tell you otherwise. Some costs are worth paying." It was signed, simply, Constance. I folded the paper and put it in my pocket. Bryn said there was one more thing. The hospital had completed their internal review. They wanted to meet with me tomorrow, 2 p.m. She suggested I attend. I said I would. The next day, I drove to the hospital. Patricia Holden met me in the same small office. This time another person was present, the hospital's chief nursing officer. They asked me to sit. The chief nursing officer spoke first. She said the investigation had revealed systemic failures, inadequate oversight, insufficient protections for both patients and staff who reported concerns. She said they were implementing new protocols, mandatory training, anonymous reporting mechanisms, regular audits. She said they recognized that I had been placed in an impossible position, following orders that should never have been given, facing retaliation for doing what was right. She said my employment was being reinstated effective immediately, with a formal apology and a request that I consider joining their new patient advocacy committee. I asked if I had a choice. She said, of course. I could return to floor nursing, or I could resign, or I could help them build something better. I asked for time to think. She said I could have 2 weeks. I left and drove home. I thought about Constance's note, about what she had said. Some costs are worth paying. I thought about Nadine. 22 years of perfect attendance, of following rules, of protecting herself, and in the end she had lost everything anyway. I thought about the mathematics of it, the cold logic that Constance's husband had carried for 43 years, choosing who lives, choosing who suffers, based on rank, based on convenience, based on what protects you most. I realized I had been doing the same calculation for 3 years, protecting my job over protecting my patients, following orders over following conscience, until one night, when an 81-year-old woman refused to stay silent and forced me to choose. 2 weeks later, I called the chief nursing officer. I said I would return. I would join the committee. I would try to build something better. She said she was glad. I returned to the hospital on a Thursday evening. Monica greeted me warmly. Roland nodded from across the corridor. The floor looked the same but felt different. Constance's room was empty. She had been discharged 5 days earlier. I stood in the doorway for a moment. The bed was made with fresh linens, waiting for the next patient. The next story, the next choice someone would have to make. I went to work. Some nights are still difficult. I wake thinking about those 6 weeks, about what I missed, about what I allowed to happen through silence. But I also think about what changed, about the choice I finally made, about the fact that sometimes the cost of doing right arrives long after the moment you should have done it, and you pay it anyway, because the alternative is living with a different cost, one that compounds, one that never stops growing. Constance was right. Obedience and conscience sometimes point in opposite directions, and when they do, you have to decide which loss you can live with. I chose the loss I could live with, and I would choose it again. Thank you for listening to this story. If it made you think about the choices you face in your own life, about the moments when rules and conscience diverge, then maybe it mattered. Maybe we all carry calculations we have not examined closely enough. Maybe we all have someone waiting for us to see them when everyone else looks away. If you found something valuable here, I would appreciate if you would share this with someone who might need to hear it.